All right, perfect. We're recording. So thank you all again for joining us. I'm Christine Mallinson. I'm the director of the Center for Social Science Scholarship, but of course, today I'm here as a presenter in my capacity on as a PI on a current Build and Broaden grant. So let me tell you just a little bit about what we're going to try to cover today. So I'll present a little bit first about the Build and Broaden program because it is an unusual program. And then I'll talk a bit about my project so that you can see how we put together a project that, adhered to the goals and vision of the program. And then I'll turn it over to Morgan Henderson and Morgan Muslim, who will talk about their projects through the Hilltop Institute. And then we can have time for some Q&A and such. Okay, so let me again just present a little bit about the mechanism itself. So it's coming out of the SBE Directorate, which I think is pretty applicable to all of us. And the next submission date, January 19th, and thereafter annually. So I think it is being renewed. Originally, it was sort of, kind of a year-to-year solicitation. So it looks like it's been successful enough that now they're going to continue to put to open up the competition. So Build and Broaden, or B2, supports fundamental research and research capacity across disciplines at MSIs and encourages research collaborations with scholars at MSI. So this is one of the reasons why it's great for UMBC. We're an MSI. There are some tweaks on that where you don't have to be a PI at an MSI, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so the rationale is because usually it's sort of a, kind of a rich get richer model. And often MSIs, HBCUs, community colleges, so forth, have been kind of left out of that in the process. So their rationale is that NSF has received comparatively few submissions from or involving scholars at MSIs. And this was really an attempt to address this problem, right? Specifically through the Build and Broaden program. So the whole rationale is broadening participation in research funding, research infrastructure, research participation, and so forth, okay? SBE offers Build and Broaden in order to increase proposal submissions, advance research collaborations and networks involving MSI scholars, and support research activities in the SBE sciences at MSIs. So they're looking for research projects that increase students' pursuit of graduate training, enhance PI productivity, build research capacity, or cultivate partnerships. So this is actually really important because there are two parts of this, right? The basic research part of it, and then the networks, collaborations, and partnerships part of it. And when I talk about our project, I'll let you know how we actually fully integrated both of those so they weren't separate. But one thing to bear in mind is that this is not simply a, broadening participation grant. It's also the basic research piece, right? So you really do have to have both. It's not just an applied mechanism, in other words. So B2 is designed to support research projects that contribute to stronger, more innovative science by diversifying research and widening the pipeline, intellectual innovation, new ways to diversify and sustain collaborations, building capacity and enhancing research productivity. This one's really important, and fostering partnerships that strengthen research capacity for faculty at MSIs, and of course also students in their research trajectories. So again, in just a minute, I'll give you some examples of how we hit those main points. So a couple logistical details. As it says here, the PI must be full-time at an MSI, or you could be somebody at a non-MSI institution if you include an MSI scholar, as functionally what this says is as one of the core leaders, right, on your proposal. But if you're not at an MSI yourself as PI, you have to check a couple more boxes. So you have to clearly demonstrate genuine collaboration. So they're looking to avoid just sort of superficially adding on. Again, this doesn't really apply to us because we are at an MSI, but I think they wanted to make sure that it wouldn't be, other PIs just sort of superficially, using, right, a scholar at an MSI almost. So, as they're saying here, overall direct costs, at least 50% of that has to go to the MSI. So it can't just be kind of a superficial collaboration. Most of the awards, let's see. Okay, so let me actually tell you a couple other logistical details first. Most of the awards seem to be roughly about 280,000 for 2 or 3 years. That's what ours was. That's what Morgan and Morgan's, I believe, is. We sort of guesstimate it. Typically a program officer will say you should ask for what you need, right? And there's no target. There's no special target. But we sort of looked at how much funding was available for this program and how many awards they intended to give and did some back of the envelope math. And I think it's probably fair to say that's a good sized award, was somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 to 300. If you're interested in this mechanism, I would encourage you to attend the webinars. They offer pretty frequent webinars for this because it's a pretty new program. And I think when we were drafting our proposal, I attended probably 2 of these, and we reached out to the program officer. One of them had a discussion with her and followed up with her. So we had a lot of, FaceTime, which was very, very helpful in sort of understanding what they were looking for, right? And kind of what are the specifics of how they wanted products or research and so forth coming out of this mechanism. You could apply to Build and Broaden through one of these other mechanisms too. So there are the early concept grants, the eager proposal. There's the research coordination network proposals. I know the eagers are often about the same amount of funding. I think the RCN proposals are larger. So again, I've only applied to Build and Broaden through Build and Broaden. I haven't applied to Build and Broaden through one of these other mechanisms, but I did want to alert you in case you all were interested in one of those. And it's possible that the Research Coordination Network might be something bigger. I'm not exactly sure. So one of the things that they, I believe, have fairly recently added is the caveat that they're also encouraging proposals from institutions that don't have a ton of NSF funding overall. That is not us. In full transparency, we do pretty well at UMBC with NSF money. So, you could use this advanced search tool and just check it out, but I'm pretty sure we don't meet this criteria. That being said, UMBC has 2 active Build and Broaden awards right now. So I think it's fair to say this isn't like a restriction, it's maybe a preference. So somebody with a strong proposal, it may, that may outweigh this piece. It's also that it's possible that this was a newly added eligibility. I don't think that was necessarily in there when I applied 2 years ago. So it's possible that, they may be realizing that, some universities, for instance, UC Santa Barbara, where my co-author was, is a minority serving institution, but a highly resourced one. So I think what they're trying to get at here is that they're hoping to support all sorts of MSIs, particularly maybe not the highly resourced ones, right? But again, I don't necessarily think that this is a deal breaker, but I did want you to be aware of it. So there actually is a webinar coming up, a whole workshop, a 2-day workshop, November 1st and 2nd, called Diversifying Diversity, that's being put forward by the SBE Directorate. And they actually invited me to speak. I'm super excited about that and super honored to present about our project. There are 4 of us on the first day who are presenting about different Build and Broaden projects. So I'm excited, and you all, if you attend, will probably see some similar slides and similar points to what I'm going to talk about today. But if you are interested and have the time, that would be a super deep dive, I think, into what the Build and Broaden program is and how they're really using it, to achieve this broadening participation that they're looking for. There are Build and Broaden program guidelines that are out pertinent to this new deadline, and then there are lots of office hours coming up yesterday, but then also in November and December. Okay, so that is that's helpful, and of course, like I said, we also reached out to the program officers. So I'm just going to spend like 5 or 10 minutes to talk to you a little bit about what our award is, and then I'll turn it over to Morgan and Morgan. So I'm presenting today on behalf of myself and my co-PI, Ann Charity Headley, who I've worked with for many, many years. Throughout these couple of slides, you'll also hear about our broader team. That includes, it's a team of about 25. It includes Black and African American junior and mid-career scholars who are research collaborators, others who are workshop leaders, advisory board members, and of course we've got students as well, Kara, of which is one of them who's on our call. So that's the research network that we sort of formed through this grant. I do want to acknowledge my own positionality here, and in much of my work, I sort of go in more more deeply to that, I just want to mention that, you know, I think it's important to let you all know my intentionality for doing this work as the PI. My work, it really addresses power dynamics and inequality surrounding language. That was a really grounded in formative life experiences I had in two regards. One was growing up as a white person in the US South, and the other was growing up as the granddaughter of immigrants, where I really saw how language was really a key mechanism in a lot of the social inequality that's out there, which is why I went on to do my research and graduate training in linguistics and sociology. So some of that context, I hope, is part of you all understanding my context and intentionality behind the work that I'm doing, which really attempts to decolonize and dismantle linguistics in the academy and making room for more collaboration and inclusion. So that's kind of what we're going for here. So this is my PI, my co-PI Anne and myself, and a snapshot of one of our Zoom calls, which we do monthly. So the project that we are working on examines how Black and African American faculty in linguistics and the language sciences, so that includes things like speech pathology and things like that, linguistically navigate their professional experiences with the goal of yielding insight into how language discrimination might play a role in underrepresentation of Black scholars in some of these, what you might call persistently white fields. So linguistics is a persistently white field. The irony is that Black language practices are overstudied and overrepresented in the literature at the same time that there's this real imbalance of actual Black scholars in linguistics. So we are studying, you know, linguistic inequalities, how those cause individuals in the academy to experience linguistic racism, inequalities that might surface through things like evaluation of people's language in professional situations, how Black faculty are assessed in terms of their professional competence. So you all might have seen some of this research. There was a book out a couple years ago, 2013, I think, called Professional Incompetence, or Presumed Incompetence, sorry, which was about how a lot of these implicit and explicit biases pile up and lead to challenges that are very difficult for Black junior mid-career faculty to overcome in academia. So we've got some literature that documents these issues in academia, but they have not been studied for linguistics. So what our project is going to do, the basic research, the empirical research part of it, is to collaboratively collect data on some of these empirical, you know, sort of the empirical nature of some of these challenges, where we're all together kind of shaping some of the research questions and, you know, carrying out the survey and interviews that we've done. At the same time, the broadening participation piece is we're collaboratively creating presentations, publications, which are helping the research trajectories of these junior mid-career scholars, right? So it's advancing them towards their goals in academia of persistence and success. And then at the same time, we're forming connections across Black scholars at all these different types of universities. So again, you know, community college to historically Black colleges, to other MSIs, to these persistently white institutions, which is meeting that goal of build and broaden, of building research infrastructure. So folks who may not have such a strong tradition at their universities of grant-funded research have the opportunity to work through our research network with some of the folks who are at more highly resourced institutions where there is that greater tradition of external funding, okay? And then our final piece is that by working to amplify and elevate the research of these faculty in ways that hopefully translate into their career success, we're then helping broaden participation in linguistics, sort of, you know, challenging that persistently white nature of the field, which also then helps diversify the professoriate, right, and so on and so forth. So those are kind of how we talked about all of those elements in our proposal for Build and Broaden. So our aims were to, I've already really kind of mentioned this, but just so you all see, is to talk about biases, examine biases and inequalities related to professional experience, and to apply those research-based insights to broaden participation, okay? So I've mentioned this, our 25-member research network. It includes some of the institutions: Eastern Carolina University, Florida State University, Hampton University in Virginia, Santa Monica College, a community college in California, UC Santa Barbara, UC Irvine, University of Pittsburgh, University of South Carolina. It's sort of amazing, all of the institutions that are represented when our folks get together. And again, these are connecting people who are really in similar spheres, but didn't already perhaps know each other, and really forging those connections. So some of the things that our scholars have done can fall into two broad categories: a collaborative research category and a professional development category. So together we've done an online survey project of how linguistics courses and courses in aligned disciplines like education or communications typically teach about African American language or African American English. We've done interviews and focus groups for a forthcoming book project co-authored by some of these folks who are on the research network. So all of this, these collaborative presentations, publications, all of this is meant to, again, provide research into these questions while also alleviating things like solo status and you know, the isolation that often comes for what for many of these scholars is the case of being the only Black linguist in a linguistics department, or perhaps the only Black linguist in an English department, or something like that, which can be very isolating. We're really grateful that the NSF award has been able to provide us funding to help facilitate the collaborative activities of the network, to support our online convenings, our conferences, to support our wonderful graduate and undergraduate students on the team, all of whom are getting lots of training through this project. So we've also, at the same time, we carry out professional development activities. We meet monthly on Zoom. You saw that picture. And during our monthly Zoom calls, we have a 2-hour block where we do research and career workshops. So sometimes that's us as PIs leading that on, how to write a grant. That was like a summer series that we did this past summer. Sometimes we have guest speakers. So tomorrow we're actually having an editor from Oxford University Press come and speak to the group about publication pathways. So some stats so far: we've had 10 monthly research and career workshops. We have 8 book chapters in edited volumes that are accepted, 1 journal article under review, 1 accepted, 7 conference panels and presentations. That should actually say 6 delivered, 1 under review, because we just got an acceptance this morning and I haven't had a chance to update, and 5 public and scholarly talks and webinars. Not bad, right? For year 1, it's pretty impressive, and folks have really, really been working hard. So we're closing in on the end of year 1 of our 3-year project. This doesn't include an accounting of individual mentorship sessions or other research activities we've done. It also doesn't include our website that's under development. I just want to do very, very, very brief touching on our one of our featured publications that we have, that is working on getting published here, called Solidarity and Collectivity in Decolonizing Linguistics. And you can see all of the folks from the research network that are joining us on this publication. So going forward, some of our goals: continuing to present our collaborative scholarship, continuing to carry out high impact presentations so that people know about our work, submitting for follow-on funding, creating multimedia projects like webinars so that we can share findings from the project, findings from our survey and interviews, so that people can kind of, sort of that public, increasing public knowledge about informal science learning, learning about Black language and culture, scholarly communication, and so forth. So those are our goals. So I want to thank, here's another picture. I want to thank NSF's Build and Broaden program. I want to thank everybody in our research network. I want to thank UMBC and Stanford, which is where my co-PI is right now. I just want to mention our references here quickly from some of the conferences and publications that we have under review. And I think that's everything for now. I know this has been a lot of information, and feel free to get in touch. Don't hesitate if you have an idea and you want to chat about it. In fact, Morgan and I chatted about their project as they were in the process of submitting, and it was really exciting for me to see what they were working on. So I think this is a really, really compelling mechanism. And I'm going to turn it over to Morgan and Morgan. And what I'm excited about is that you'll get to see two models for what this type of mechanism can support. So let me see if I can stop sharing. Okay, and Morgan, take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Christine. Let me just pull my slides up here. Okay, can everyone see the slides? Perfect. So hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Christine, for all your guidance and advice along the way. Thank you for organizing this lunch and learn. That was wonderful to hear about your project and how it developed and how it's going. Sounds amazing. So myself and my co-PI, Morgan Muslim, who I'll introduce more fully in a second, we're here to talk about our NSF Build and Broaden that we won this past cycle and that has been officially going for, 20 days now. And yeah, it was a totally different model than it sounds like Christine's was, our pathway to this point. So our presentation is gonna kind of talk a lot about our kind of journey with this grant, less about the grant itself, although we have one slide, and more about just what was the process actually like, because to be honest, we're relative newcomers to the grant space. We're both researchers with Hilltop. Hilltop is a research center that has been on campus since about 1994. We do a lot of operational health research for the state of Maryland, the Maryland Department of Health. We do tons of great work there. Not so much research, although there is a push to get more funded research in recent years, and this is part of that push. Okay, so we're going to talk to you about what is Build and Broaden. Christine already touched on that, or did that very well, so this will be really quick. We're going to talk about our experience with the grant, what went well, what we would have done differently, and then we're going to talk about our next steps. And also, we're going to be, myself and Dr. Muslim are going to be alternating slides from this point on, so she'll be speaking, then I'll be speaking, and so on. So anyway, again, my name is Morgan Henderson, and I'm a data scientist and economist at the Hilltop Institute. Dr. Muslim, over to you.
Thank you so much. So I'm the other Morgan on this project. I'm again talking. We're going to be alternating slides, and I wanted to first talk about a little bit the NSF Build and Broaden. Obviously, you've had a very extensive overview of it. So very quickly, of course, this is the Build and Broaden mechanism. It's in the SBE, and it's directed towards minority serving institutions. Next slide, please.
So yeah, our first question was, when we even heard about the Build and Broaden, it was, what is a minority serving institution, and is UMBC one of those? And so there's a bunch of different kinds of minority serving institutions out there: historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, Asian American and Native institutions. And so there are big lists. I think there's maybe 500, 600. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but there's quite a number. And yeah, UMBC very much is one. I think the Department of Education kind of maintains the general lists, but NSF is, we're going to talk about this in a sec, but they're super easy to work with in terms of one-pagers. They have been very responsive to questions and one-pagers, and so if you want to know, hey, is my institution an MSI, I'm pretty sure you can just email the relevant program officer and they would happily tell you. But so anyway, we had to confirm that yes, we are indeed eligible for this grant. Next slide.
So why is UMBC a good candidate for NSF Build and Broaden funding? Well, we do get a lot of NSF funding, but not so much in the SBE category. So since 2015, UMBC got about $50 million overall from NSF, but under $1 million of that was for SBE research. So there's a strong narrative there. UMBC has demonstrated excellent in research. As sure as you all know, we got R1 status fairly recently. The other two universities in the state that have R1 status are Maryland College Park and Johns Hopkins. And we can apply that excellence in research to SBE research, with NSF funding. And that was actually the narrative that we built in our application. Next slide.
So yeah, thanks, Dr. Muslim. Again, a little bit about Hilltop. So we are researchers at Hilltop. I've been at Hilltop for 4.5 years. Dr. Muslim has been at Hilltop for 2 years. And we are kind of part of this push to increase the research footprint of Hilltop. And so we work on a variety of projects. It's almost like a kind of nonprofit consulting firm buried within a university. So there's clients and deliverables and deadlines and stuff like that. But again, more recently, an emphasis on research. But the big and burning question for Hilltop is always, who's going to be paying for this? Because we work on client contracts, and someone has to be funding the research. It's not like it can just kind of be done. And so there's hence this big push towards obtaining research funding for for Hilltop. Next slide.
So this is going to be a little bit about our research project. So the recent development in health policy where we both work has been hospital price transparency. It's a very important topic because hospital spending constitutes a very large portion of the economy, so over $1 trillion. And hospital spending also drives healthcare costs up significantly in the United States. And up till this hospital price transparency regulation went in effect, January 1st, 2021, these prices were largely secret. These were private negotiation, confidential negotiation between insurers and hospital, and they were different with different insurers and different hospitals, but researchers could not understand this, they did not see this, it was trade secrets, confidentiality agreements. CMS did a very large push to kind of increase price transparency. There was a bit of a legal dispute, as you can imagine, between the hospitals in the United States and CMS. But finally, we reached January 1st, 2021. This hospital price transparency regulation comes into effect, and almost every single hospital in the US is now required to post on their website a publicly available file that lists their prices for self-pay patients and for insurers, both private and public, so Medicare, Medicaid, but also big insurers like United or Aetna. Next slide, please.
So we're in this situation where Dr. Muslim and we've been kind of working in this area for like a year or so. We'd gotten some stuff out. We had a couple of Health Affairs Forefront, that formerly known as Health Affairs blog. So, not peer reviewed. We'd worked with reporters from the New York Times, and so that was like a big piece. That was really cool. And we had obtained a little bit of internal funding from Hilltop to do these things. And so we knew we wanted to keep going with this. So even before we knew about the Build and Broaden, we sent a one-pager into the Nancy Lutz at NSF, who was at that time, I think, the Econ program director. And we just kind of pitched an idea of saying, hey, there's this amazing new data out there. It's pretty messy. It's a new data source. So, we'd love to collect it, clean it up, synthesize it, and release it to researchers in the same spirit as the University of Minnesota's Integrated Public Use Micro Database, which does the fantastic work of integrating and harmonizing census data and survey data over time. We wanted to do the same thing for this hospital pricing data. Dr. Lutz got back to us quickly, super responsive. She said, okay, sounds like a cool area, but this is not NSF research. NSF research has to meet 2 criteria: intellectual merit and broader impact. So you need to think about your intellectual merit. We don't fund data collection work, we fund research. So we said, okay. And so then and she had mentioned, hey, we have this thing called Build and Broaden. The Build and Broaden 2.0 by that time had closed, but she said that's probably going to be a 3.0. So maybe you want to think about that. So the 3.0 solicitation came online in December 1 of 2021, and the deadline was end of February 2022. So it's a pretty short window. And so we we had been keeping our eyes open for it. We saw it, and we met with Christine, I think in December of 2021 at some point. We sent another one-pager in to the Build and Broaden program officer in mid-January, and kind of saying the same thing of, hey, there's this amazing new data source out there. We want to collect it. We want to do stuff with it. And they said, okay, sounds pretty good, but what's the intellectual merit? You got to have intellectual merit here. We're not a data collection agency. We fund research. So that was some good, if not somewhat challenging feedback, but it was ultimately very good feedback. And I will pass it over to Dr. Muslim for the next slide.
So Dr. Anderson already kind of touched on this, but we got this reply from the NSF, and he said, yes, of course, you are eligible for the Build and Broaden program. UNBC is an MSI. The research sounds interesting, but can you identify the intellectual merit? We had proposed something in the field of economics, and they got back to us saying, okay, in terms of basic science, what is economics here? What is it? What are you trying to do? We need an intellectual merit. Again, really harping on this point. And also in terms of linkages to existing areas of scholarship in SBE. So it doesn't have to be economics for a project. That's what we really focused on, but it could be anything within that directorate. And once again, our first proposal was too data driven. We were very excited by this new data source. Of course, it's very cool. It's very interesting, especially in the field of health policy. But the NSF was like, once again, we fund research. What are you going to do with this data that is going to advance the field of economics?
Okay, so at this point, it's like mid to late January. The deadline is in March 1st. And we're sort of thinking, all right, do we go ahead with this? Do we not? Oh, it'll be a lot of work. But ultimately, we decided, yes, we're gonna do this thing. And then, so there are internal deadlines, of course, to hit. You got to get it to, of course, the sponsored programs office at UMBC, and so on and so forth. So we didn't leave ourselves very much time, and that was one thing we would do differently. We would leave ourselves a lot of time, even like the 3 months. The maximum window, that's still not very much time. So we would have probably pushed much harder, much earlier. But fortunately, we did have the support of Hilltop. We were sort of left to our own devices to just do our best possible effort at this grant. We had this little amount of seed funding that we had secured, so that kind of covered our time while we wrote the grant. And then we spent a lot of time kind of combing through the lists of awards in economics, looking for people that we knew. And then we reached out to them and said, hey, we're doing this. You got any advice for us? Got any tips? Some people shared like all of their application proposal documents, ranging from their 1-page project summary to the 15-page project description to the budget justification. And that was so helpful because we didn't have anything to go on. Hilltop, I don't think we've ever won an NSF research award. I don't know if we've actually been PI on any research award. So we were kind of in new territory for Hilltop. So it was a real learning experience, but we were fortunate that we had colleagues who we could reach out to and who were supportive. Next slide, Morgan.
And I know we've touched on this and we keep repeating this, but that we did a lot of pondering and deliberation on 2 points. What is the intellectual merit of a research project? So how will this add to the body of knowledge? And what is the broader impact? So how will this help the world? But especially for Build and Broaden, as you can tell from the name, the broader impact is very important. And I think that's it's a crucial point because sometimes, especially as researchers, we tend to spend a lot of time on the intellectual merit portion of our work. What is our research doing? What are the publications going to be? But especially for the Build and Broaden, the NSF wants to know how this research is going to advance, broaden the MSI's reach, the MSI's mission. And you'll see in later slides that we actually spent a lot of time detailing this part of our work. And these are the two criteria on which all NSF proposals are judged. Again, for the Build and Broaden, it's especially important to have a broader impact. And when we did get those reviews back, we saw how these two criteria are very important for the reviewers. Next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Muslim. So we took inspiration certainly from Christine's grant, where everything kind of feeds back into itself, where the intellectual merit is kind of part and parcel of the broader impact with the research network, which feeds back into the intellectual merit. So that was, you know, we were striving to for something like that sense of cohesion. And so we ended up leveraging some research expertise we had in-house and some projects we had worked on quite recently relating to Medicaid expansion. So very briefly, Medicaid is a publicly funded insurance program for low-income individuals. And as part of the Affordable Care Act, states can, if they want to, expand their income eligibility criteria for Medicaid and allowing more people to enter this publicly funded insurance program. 38 states have done so, 12 have not done so. And so this creates this almost natural experiment, kind of every state is a part of the laboratory kind of ideal where there's a lot of discontinuous borders where up until I'm picking two states at random, the Oklahoma-Texas border, people in Oklahoma up to a relatively high income level, they can be covered by Medicaid. People in Texas cannot be covered by Medicaid. So it creates this sort of nice patchwork of discontinuity, which we propose to leverage for our study. Many other studies in economics have done the same. We're not creating any new research frameworks here, but we wanted to focus on Medicaid expansion. And also because we have a real equity lens for our work at Hilltop, and we like to focus on what are the impacts of expanding health insurance for low-income people. This is one of the research areas that Hilltop works a lot on. So the intellectual merit is going to be, we're going to be conducting two studies exploiting the spatial discontinuities of one state expanding Medicaid, another state not expanding Medicaid, by zooming in on hospitals on either side of those borders, and then trying to leverage these sharp discontinuities in state policy to look at how Medicaid expansion shapes hospital pricing. There's a couple of theories out there on how different payer mix within a hospital can affect the prices that certain payers get charged, and Medicaid expansion will be a nice way to try to get at that. So there are some open questions in economics kind of relating to health econ theory that we propose to test in this study, or in these two studies, excuse me. And then as a broader impact, this is then kind of all the other stuff we had already been wanting to do. So this data is out there, it's public, but it's messy and decentralized. So we propose to collect a bunch of it, clean it up, put it all together, publicly post it. And this is right in Hilltop's wheelhouse. We know how to do this, we're good at doing this. We propose to promote this data, so proactively reach out to researchers at UMBC and other MSIs, because a lot of people don't know about this data. We talk constantly to people about this data, reporters like every week, and people don't really know, hey, this data is out there, and hey, we can actually do stuff with this data. So we're gonna promote the data to other researchers, and we really wanna build capacity within economics at UMBC. So we have budget for 2 undergrad research assistants. This is gonna be a kind of mentoring research assistant type position where, you know, we want to help people who want to have further careers in economics, which is a field that does have trouble with diversity and gender balance. We want to help broaden that umbrella. So that's an important part of the grant. Over to you, Dr. Muslim.
So we already touched on this, but applicants get 15 single-spaced pages to really wow the reviewers. And that might seem like a lot at first, but you quickly realize it is not a lot to flesh out both your intellectual merit and your broader impact. we did use almost all 15, and you were also limited to 90 citations, which once again sounds like a lot, but we very quickly got up there. Next slide.
Yeah, and so just kind of thinking in retrospect, what helped, my advisor at UMichigan when I was doing my PhD, I had seen her literally come across an NSF solicitation that had like maybe 6 weeks before the deadline, think, oh, my project could be good for this. And so I saw the whole trajectory of work on the idea, work on the grant, the bits of the grant that seemed to be very helpful. She actually, I found an old copy of like the draft of that grant project description. Dr. Muslim has experience with NIH grants, and so we reached out to old colleagues who sent us some grant materials. So that was very, very helpful. Hilltop was super supportive of this. UMBC was very supportive. We were definitely pushing these deadlines really late. And I think the UMBC Office of Sponsored Projects likes to have 3 days. I think we gave them like 1 day, but they still turned it around. And so they didn't have to, but they were nice to us, which was great. We had put out some work on the topic, so we kind of had this small but growing track record to indicate that we had some momentum in this area. With the build and broaden part of the grant, I have a bunch of teaching experience from my UMichigan days, and in fact here at UMBC, Dr. Muslim has teaching experience, and she's written things about DEI and sat on DEI committees, and so we had some of that experience we could draw on. We got a piece into health affairs after the project went in, and so we kind of shamelessly let the program officers know, hey, we got a pretty good publication just now, you might want to consider this. What we would do differently, absolutely start way earlier, and then probably send another round of one-pagers to NSF. I mean, what we found was the people who reviewed our grant, they, of course, were not the same people that review the one-pagers. So you might, the feedback on the one-pagers, if it's negative, it doesn't mean your grant isn't going to get funded. But I think we would have wanted to push on that research idea a little more, a little earlier. Now, let's see, Dr. Muslim.
So, of course, all well that ends well. We did end up getting the grant. We got the news in July of this year. The grant actually officially started on October 1st. The NSF has been very responsive by email. Once you get the grant, you also get a signed person that answers all your questions. And then it was time to get started. And I'll let Dr. Henderson tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in the 20 days since the grant started.
I'm on mute. So now the project work is getting underway. We hired a couple great student undergrad research assistants. We're onboarding them. They actually start on Monday, which is exciting. We're up to our elbows in data collection. We're going to set up a project website. We are amassing our Zotero libraries, et cetera, so all the usual kind of research stuff. But we're now in the kind of peaceful part, the research project part. But yeah, it was definitely a bit of a whirlwind doing the grant, getting the feedback, getting the news relatively quickly, actually, in about 3 months. So that's our journey, and we're very happy to again open it up and answer any questions that anyone might have. Thank you very much.
Yep. Likewise. Thanks, everybody. Any questions or anything like that?
So you had a March deadline, although then it's a January deadline. Do you know if going forward, is it going to stay in January? Is that what you said, Christine, earlier?
It is supposed to stay in January. We also, I think, had a March deadline, so they must have done some internal shifting. Yeah,
Gotcha.
but now the solicitation says January 19th thereafter, or something like that. So I think so.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I realized I didn't sort of say what our journey was we originally applied with our grant to the linguistics program with a similar concept that was not funded. And the response, it was similar to the one pagers that Morgan and Morgan talked about, where the reviewer said the broadening participation is amazing, but sharpen the intellectual merit. Now, of course, that was for the linguistics program where they're looking for sometimes a different type of, intellectual merit and different theoretical questions. But that also was the same feedback we got to Build and Broaden, which was, again, don't think of this as just a BP, just a broadened participation award. It really is empirically driven with the BP, and ideally those would be super integrated, right? So that was feedback. It sounds like that all of us got more than once, right? Because sometimes and we were super excited. We're excited about every piece, but we were super excited about the broadening participation piece. And, it's easy to devote a lot of your page bandwidth to that, right? So just making sure that it's balanced. And Amy has put into the chat, which is exactly right. Morgan and Morgan were on CS3's podcast quite recently talking about their project. So if you want to hear more while you commute or walk the dog or whatever, it's a great episode.
Thanks, Christine. And I wanted to just add in one last logistical thing I just remembered. So I think there's one more criteria for like eligibility for the Build and Broaden, where it's like a PI can only put in one grant per year or something like that. So I don't know if that's, maybe PIs were putting in multiple grants from MSIs in the first round. And so I think this program is I think it's hit its maturity phase where the various kinks and stuff have been worked out. But again, like that criteria for, hey, the institution can't have had a ton of NSF funding in the past 5 years. That may be because some surprising institutions actually do have MSI status, like I think Minnesota, maybe Texas Austin, places, these kind of big flagship universities. So I think perhaps there were some loopholes that were getting closed in the first few rounds, but now it's kind of hit a kind of stable maturity point. So I guess, Christine, if I could ask you, so you mentioned that you had applied in this project to linguistics and it hadn't gone through. What had your experience with NSF grants up until this point be?
So that's a great question. So we actually, my co-author and I, had NSF funding previously through an entirely different directorate. It was called DRL, which I think now has changed and it's morphed, but it was called Division of Formal and Informal Learning. NSF doesn't, or at least at that point, didn't have a defined education directorate. And that was the directorate that handled K-12 informal learning. And so our work was with schools, working with teachers it was STEM teachers actually, STEM teachers in Maryland and Virginia to study their linguistic knowledge and then increase their linguistic knowledge so that they could better serve culturally and linguistically diverse students. Often that's the sort of thing that people just sort of say, I haven't been trained on this, so let the English teachers deal with it. And we realized there were actually a lot of reasons why it was important for STEM teachers to know about that too. So we had funding for that 3-year study through this other directorate. And I think now it's shaped into the EHR, which is a little bit more education focused. But anyway, so we had, after that award, applied for something that was a bit of a similar spinoff to what was then that EHR directorate, which I think was looking for something a little bit different. And so then we took a pause and then came up with this idea and applied to linguistics. The linguistics directorate, which is why we hadn't often applied in the past, tends to be a little bit small and often favors these very, particular theoretical research awards projects that are often in what are traditionally considered some of the core theoretical areas. So we applied, didn't get it, and one of the program officers was like, you know, this is actually probably pretty closely aligned to this new director, or this new program that we have called Build and Broaden. So we had seen it, and it was in the back of our minds, and then that was the nudge that we needed to submit it there again. So yeah, sorry, a little bit of a long-winded story there, but yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So we sent in that first one pager, just totally unprompted, to the econ program in July of 2021. And yeah, the response was, okay, you know, you need to sort of flesh out some intellectual merit, but also it said, okay, you know, maybe you should partner with like a really established research university like Johns Hopkins or something, and that may help any subsequent applications. And that kind of bugged us a little bit, actually, because we thought, well, we had good ideas, you know, we don't just want to be like the little buddy of Hopkins or something like that. So that there was that incentive for us as well. You know, we're both quite early stage researchers. Hilltop is wanting to establish a deeper grant portfolio, and so yeah, I mean, we kind of just threw everything we could at this one, and we did not think we would get it. We had absolutely no idea, so it was a real delight that it came through.
I'm so delighted that you got it too. And I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think that's kind of the rationale behind this program is, you know, the less name brand universities, right, often suffer from the elite bias and prestige that often just gets attached to those names of universities, right? So I think that's some of the rationale is, you know, have a program specifically structured to give a bit of a preference to MSIs broadly defined. And again, it does sound like they're narrowing that slightly in terms of making sure that it's not only the super highly resourced MSIs, right? But again, I think it's a pretty brilliant solution to the problem that they were trying to address through Build and Broaden. So good. Any other questions that you all have? I see in the chat, you know, definitely if you all have ideas later, any, you know, want to chat further, follow up or anything like that, just let us know.
I'm curious, Christine. So in your
Yeah.
project, oh, now I see the time. I got a meeting at 1, so
No,
I
no,
have
you're
to
fine.
leave in a
Oh,
minute.
okay.
But
Okay.
like, so
Yeah, no
maybe we
worries.
can follow up later. But like,
Yeah.
what are the different ways in which you're looking at use of language is, you know, a potential barrier, or, you know, like, is it just in the teaching or in presentations, in publications, or I'm just curious.
Yeah, all of the above. So we're getting at this through that piece specifically through in-depth interviews and focus groups, and really just asking questions about every stage of the professional career, which even includes the K-12 experience, because what we see is there's lots of literature in linguistics that documents these same exact biases and inequalities happening in the K-12 space. It would stand to reason that things perpetuate in the higher education space too. The research just hasn't been done. And so we started working on the higher ed space, and we realized this isn't just students in higher ed, this is also affecting faculty in higher ed. So the faculty who make it all the way through, despite all of these, everything from implicit to explicit biases, really have, you know, overcome in many ways sometimes these really severe challenges and sort of threats to the notion of their legitimacy to be in faculty spaces, right? And their sort of, you know, kind of the notion of linguistic professionalism. So I think what we're discovering too is a lot of these folks, just like many successful, you know, kids in K-12 who are successful in these sort of predominantly white spaces, get very good at being linguistic navigators who really can kind of shift and, you know, be very linguistically flexible, which means that they have very attuned skills of perception, linguistic perception and production, hence the title of our grant. But that also is a very taxing thing to have to do every day, all day long, right? The cognitive load of having to constantly monitor what linguistic expectations are implicit in this environment and how maybe do I have to adjust my language to suit those. That's an extra burden, right? A cognitive, cultural, linguistic burden that folks are navigating. So that's part of it that's coming at it as well. And those are very subtle things. So interviews, focus groups, for sure. The survey project that we're doing is more focusing on how are the concepts and ideas surrounding African American language being taught and where is it being taught, which also has implications for where faculty are sometimes isolated and pigeonholed sometimes in academia, and how they're often the only one teaching some of this stuff in a way that also makes the experience very isolating, which then ties to all these other factors. So great question. Yeah, great question.
Yeah, great.
We can definitely chat more later. As you can, my students know I can talk for hours about this stuff. So
Well, I
thank you
have
all
to
so
run, but I
much.
appreciate
Yeah.
both projects sound great, and I appreciate you taking the time to
Thank you
let
for
us know about them.
coming.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. We're recording
that.
this, so if there's anybody that you know that didn't manage to make it, it'll be on CS3's YouTube channel. So thank you all.
Yeah.
It's nice seeing you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay,
See ya.
take
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.